Hi, I've been working with large companies for over 25 years on helping them take their data and information and analytical capabilities and turn it into competitive advantage. And over the last few years, these companies have asked me about big data and actually asked us to perform a benchmark, a survey of what are big companies doing with big data. We know what the dot-coms are doing, but these are financial services companies, government agencies, healthcare, et cetera. And what we found was pretty interesting. First, everybody was doing something with big data. It was in their budgets, it was in their plans, it was in the boardroom discussions. And furthermore, in our follow-up discussions over the last year, a lot of the early work on pilots and proof of concepts have actually migrated quickly into production. The second is that most companies were focused on customer analytics and risk analytics. So they were pulling their operational data, pulling behavioral data, and trying to understand better what customers were doing and where the opportunities lie, where risk data was needed, that they could pull it together for new compliance and regulatory requirements. But most importantly to us was that it was interesting that the companies were not necessarily going out to discover some great new insight from social media, as is widely reported. They were trying to handle and answer questions that have been tough challenges for them over the years, primarily using their own internal data. Their real goal was to accelerate the time to answer on business questions that are important to them but have been hard to solve. What kind of acceleration? Orders of magnitude. Let me give you a couple of examples. In one large bank, they really wanted to understand customer behavior online and offline. And the best of their abilities had been able to do 6-month projects to pull summaries of data together and get a kind of picture of an aggregate of behavior, but nothing detailed. When they brought in some big data technology, they could load all of that web traffic with their call center traffic, with their store and other interactions, and combine them and start to see patterns and paths, which they could use to improve their marketing spend. Another consumer company wanted to accelerate their ability to price in the marketplace. They had a traditional 1-month refresh of their pricing algorithms. That algorithm took 2 months to run on their legacy mainframe. With big data, they migrated that program with 6 weeks of programming and were able to run the same analysis in 20 minutes. This is enabling intraday analysis, refreshing of pricing daily on fresher data, and micro-segmentation into different markets. And finally, card companies are always worried about fraud, and they had some legacy micro-batch processes that would take their algorithms and start to detect patterns, and they could convert that into real-time streaming analytics that could detect patterns in seconds and cut losses by being quick to respond. In all of these cases, what was interesting is that speeds and feeds mattered. It mattered that they could store 100 times more data and more detailed data, and they could analyze that 100 times faster. Now, how does this work? People make these claims all the time, but what we found is that the real advantage of these enhanced speeds and feeds and a new programming model for big data is that it changes the process of analysis and insight. And that is how time to answer gets accelerated. The first way is capacity. Massive storage, massive computing power means that instead of trying to make careful decisions about the data that you bring on board for an analysis and going around and manually tying it together, you load it all. And we do have clients who today are taking raw copies of all their operational data and putting it on a big data platform so they know where it is. The second, of course, is massive I/O and computing power that can get through that data quickly as you're preparing it for analysis. The second is a technique we call containerization that's named after the innovation in shipping 50 years ago, where analysts discovered that the real delay in shipping was loading and unloading cargo, not the speed of the boat. And so they came up with standard containers for the cargo, which they could load and unload quickly. In big data, you'll hear a term called schemaless design. And that's exactly what this is. You take massive data sets, whether it's video files, text files, or simply transactional data from your systems, and rather than painstakingly model what's inside of it before you touch it, you load it onto a big data platform, and the analysts can go and open the containers and look at what they're interested inside of the containers without having to engineer all of the database into a perfect schema. And the third we call correlation. In the 1950s, I find this really fascinating. In the 1950s, John von Neumann and other scientists who had just invented the computer started to apply it to weather forecasting. And instead of looking for the perfect weather prediction algorithm and solve an equation for that, they said, well, we actually know how cells of weather interact. What if we simulated the statistical process of lots and lots of patterns of weather evolution and see which are the most likely? And that Monte Carlo simulation that they invented said the computer was leading them to the insight. They didn't really understand the system, but they understood the pieces of the system and could still use it for prediction. What these techniques have in common is they use the power of big data technology to start analysis more quickly. They're replacing careful, upfront engineering with insight-driven design. And this is going to upset a lot of people in IT, because we've spent a lot of years figuring out how to optimize, or how to develop careful, long-term, stable, repeatable solutions where everything is engineered in advance. But the only problem is that those solutions keep the data away from the analysts until it's ready. And sometimes that difference is between months of being able to get access to data immediately and having to wait a year or more for it to be developed. So this change in process, where the analysis and the insights are part of the engineering to really understand and get that data ready for general use, is a massive change. And in their really good book, plugging the book, maybe I get $10 later, Big Data, by Meyer, Schoenberger, and Kukier, they talk about this in this way. They say the change of scale, the compute scale, the data scale, the speed, has led to a change of state in which we behave differently. The quantitative change has led to a qualitative one. So one of the questions we had was, how do you build a business case for faster time to answer? And sometimes it's obvious, but often it's not, because it affects everything. And while we would build these business cases and do the ROIs, we found that TTA was actually a fundamental measure. It's a measure of the transaction cost of doing an analysis or getting an insight. And in a marketplace, when you lower transaction costs, you get a lot of benefits. In this case, accelerating TTA improves, first off, productivity and capacity. And we heard this in our panelists this morning. Your same resources can be used for more analytics in the same year. Second, in the case of analysis and insight, accuracy and relevance is improved just by being able to do it faster. Because the data usually represents something in the real world, and if you're getting your answers faster, you're responding to the real world in a more relevant and more accurate way. And third is utilization. You're lowering the hurdle rate for incorporating analytics and insights into your products and your processes, so more people will use it. And what we've seen is a business impact that is not just in customers and risk, but it's across the board. It's an ability to incorporate intelligence to make you more efficient, improve customer experience, increase sales, improve quality by responding more quickly, and overall, it affects the brand by making you a more intelligent and responsive organization. My colleague and friend, Tom Davenport, literally wrote the book on competing on analytics. And when you look at his maturity model, time to answer is fundamental to achieving more maturity and more robust adoption of insights and analytics in your organization. So finally, what we're seeing is going beyond just improving your business. Faster time to answer is actually enabling some innovation in business models. We're seeing a number of very large companies that would never consider themselves data or analytics companies packaging up their data and intelligence as products. And new markets are emerging where where companies are collaborating and exchanging information because, for example, in healthcare, 1 + 1 does equal 3. Second, we're seeing a real focus on intentional measurement. Historically, you'll hear about mining data exhaust because there's so much data there. But if you want to get ahead of the curve, you actually plan out in your products and processes what data is essential to capture. How do I know an event occurred? How do I know a positive or negative result was what came from it? I could do a lot of inferencing after the fact, but companies are now building this into their products and services. And finally, operating agility. We're seeing companies look at data and analytics and the cost performance and the power of the big data approach, allowing them to innovate, execute, and learn much more quickly than they could on traditional platforms. No longer having the year-long latencies between the request for new features, functionality, and data and the insights. They're coupling discovery and operations in a seamless flow where they're getting to market more quickly with their discoveries, and they're instrumenting their learnings, feeding that back in, and being able to iterate and stay relevant to the marketplace. So I'm really looking forward to the panel and hearing how they are leveraging big data to accelerate their time to answer and the business impact it's having for them. Thank you.